Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video, and this is a really, really important video today. This may be the most important topic that we ever cover on this channel. It is why Ohio is the center of everything. So if you're new to the channel, welcome. I am from Northeast Ohio, and it is a well-known fact that I am a huge fan of my home state and brag about that fact whenever I get a chance. I've even got my 20th Ohio shirt on today, representing the regiment that I wrote about in a recent book. But Geography Effect, a channel we have not yet done a look at, has this video. They've got 16,000 subscribers, but this video has 261,000 views. So that goes to show you just how popular it is. So I have no idea what it's going to be about, but it's a great opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics, talk about history, talk about geography, talk about Ohio's importance in the Union. And with that in mind, I want to give a shout out to Michael in Wapakoneta, Ohio, the hometown of the first man to walk on the moon. Neil Armstrong, one of our proud Ohioans, was from Wapakoneta. Thank you so much, Mike. Let's dive into this one.
Ohio is the state you might drive through on the way somewhere else. You fill up the tank near Cleveland, stop for lunch outside Columbus, and somewhere approaching Cincinnati you realize you've been in Ohio for 4 hours without a reason to get off the highway.
There have been plenty.
And yet, half of the
them.
United States lives within 500 miles of Columbus.
So I would say what he means by that is the population. Let's go back and hear what he said again.
Half of the United States.
Yeah, half the population of the United States lives within 500 miles.
Within 500 miles of Columbus. More freight moves through Ohio than almost any other state. For over a century, it picked the winner of almost every presidential election.
No Republican has ever won the presidency without winning Ohio.
Spot in Ohio, rivers that lead to the Atlantic and rivers that lead to the Gulf come within 8 miles of each other, separated by a rise so small you could miss it if you weren't looking. The welcome sign says, "The heart of it all." It reads like optimism. It kind of sounds like a joke. But if all of this is true, if Ohio sits this close to the country's population, its trade, and even its politics, then something doesn't add up. Why does a place this central—
He's got an Ohio shirt on, so he must be from Ohio too. I love it.
—feel forgettable? And what does its geography actually explain? If Ohio is this central, you would expect it to be consistent. It isn't. Draw a diagonal line across Ohio. Start at the Pennsylvania border in the northeast and drag it southwest toward Indiana. That line divides the state into two completely different worlds, and understanding why is where—
Yeah, this is Appalachia. I mean, I live right about here. I live in Mahoning County, and the county to the south of me, I can be there in 12 minutes. I can be in Columbiana County, and that is legally, according to the government's definition of Appalachia, Columbiana County is part of it.
Where everything begins. West of that line, the land is flat.
Yeah.
Strikingly flat. The kind of flat that feels engineered, though nothing human did it. You can see for miles in every direction, and nothing interrupts it for long. The horizon sits low and steady, broken only by grain silos and the occasional line of trees. About 12,000 years ago, the Laurentide ice sheet retreated from this part of North America and left behind deep, mineral-rich glacial till.
Yeah, there's a lot of evidence of the glaciers to this day. In fact, real close to me, there's Lake Glacier, it's called, and you see the big rocks, and you've got the lakes that were left behind. It's a fascinating terrain.
The soil is some of the most productive farmland in the world. The terrain is open, navigable, easy to cross. Conditions that don't just support agriculture, but movement. West of the line, Ohio looks like Indiana, like Illinois, the agricultural heartland of the continent. East of that line, everything changes. The Appalachian Plateau runs through eastern Ohio, rugged, hilly, unglaciated. The ice never reached this terrain, and the difference shows up immediately. The land rises and folds in on itself. The roads curve. The rivers cut deeper channels. You stop seeing straight lines. The rock here holds coal, not the deep, loamy soil that makes the West so productive. And that difference doesn't stay in the ground, it spreads outward. The economy follows it. The communities follow the economy. The farms give way to hollers.
Yeah, and so much of how we understand history has to be seen through the geography, rivers up until 150, 200 years ago when the railroad becomes prominent. Rivers and canals are the way that you move goods from point A to point B. And so cities are built on rivers, and then you connect bodies of water with canals. And so you connect, the Erie and the Ohio, Lake Erie and the Ohio River with a canal, the Erie and Ohio Canal. And so that's why Ohio becomes prominent, because you have the Ohio River, which at the point that it runs through Ohio is actually a larger river than the Mississippi River is, until the Ohio empties into the Mississippi. That's when the Mississippi becomes the mighty Mississippi. So the Ohio is really, really important in understanding why the state becomes what it is.
The grain elevators give way to mine heads. Settlement patterns thin out, stretch along valleys, cluster where the terrain allows it. East of the line, Ohio starts to look a lot less like the Midwest.
There's so many different ways you can divide it, though, because then you can also draw a line like through South Central here, like about where Columbus is, and the culture changes a lot. Like to my northeastern Ohio ear, when I get south of Columbus, people have an accent. Actually, even the people up here where I was talking about in Columbiana County, my church that I pastor is in Columbiana County. People at my church, to me, sound like they have a southern accent, even though they're 45 minutes away from me. That's how quickly it changes.
More like Pennsylvania. Two completely different geographies, sharing the same borders. And that divide isn't political, it isn't cultural, it isn't even economic, at least not at the start.
No, but those divides also exist.
Physical. That diagonal line is the terminal moraine, the southernmost edge of the last glacial advance, the exact point where the ice stopped, leaving one half of the state flattened and the other untouched. Ohio didn't choose to contain both of these realities. The ice just stopped there. But the moraine isn't the most important geographic fact about Ohio. The most important fact is the water.
Yep.
Ohio is one of the few places where rivers drain in two completely different directions. In the north, rivers like the Cuyahoga, the Sandusky, and the Maumee flow into Lake Erie, and eventually out to the Atlantic Ocean through the St. Lawrence. In the south, rivers like the Scioto, the Muskingum, and the Miami flow into the Ohio River, and eventually reach the Gulf through the Mississippi. The state sits directly on the divide between those two systems.
Yep.
And for most of its length across North America, that divide is obvious. A mountain range or a high ridge, something that forces separation. In Ohio, it isn't. At Akron, those two drainage systems come within 8 miles of each other. The elevation between them is just over 1,000 feet.
And think about what else you have going on here. So I'm sure I should look ahead and see what he's going to get to. He's going to talk about the canals and all that stuff. But you're talking about halfway between New York and Chicago, at least northeastern Ohio. You're talking about access to minerals like coal and iron that are right there and can be smelted and easily sent to places like Pittsburgh, because you can send them right up the river to that place. You've got plenty of places where you're growing food. You've got timber because you've got massive forests in southeastern Ohio. So you really just kind of have a little bit of everything.
Not a mountain, not a dramatic ridge, just a gradual rise. The continental divide at its most accessible. Which means something unusual is happening here. Because this state isn't just split into two different landscapes. It's sitting at the point where two halves of the continent almost connect. And for most of history, almost was close enough. Long before European settlement, Native American trade networks were already using this gap. The Portage Path, a trail connecting the north-flowing Cuyahoga River to the south-flowing Tuscarawas River.
And guess what we call that area today? It's Portage County.
Is estimated to be roughly 2,000 years old.
Actually, I think Portage County is probably a little further east than that, but that's where the name comes from.
To move between watersheds, travelers would paddle upstream, pull their canoes onto land, and carry them across that 8-mile stretch before dropping back into the water on the other side. It wasn't efficient, but it worked. And more importantly, it was repeatable. Once a route like that exists, once movement between two systems becomes predictable, everything starts to organize around it.
That is such a great point. Look at, again, this is a way of looking at history, is look at why things are where they are. Why do industries happen where they do? Why do towns spring up where they do? And it's always about something. It's about a trade route. It's about access to water. It's about minerals. It's about things like where people go from point A to point B.
Trade follows it. Settlements appear near it. Knowledge of the route spreads. The continent, at this exact point, becomes navigable in a way it isn't anywhere else nearby. When American engineers began building canal systems in the early 19th century, they didn't start from scratch.
Yeah.
They surveyed the land looking for the easiest way to connect the Great Lakes to the Ohio River system.
Why are you going to dig a long, deep ditch over miles and miles and miles any longer than you have to? It's all about the easy points.
And they found the portage path. In 1832, the Ohio and Erie Canal followed that route almost exactly, linking Lake Erie to the Ohio River through a continuous engineered waterway. Think about what that means. You are standing near Akron, Ohio, on a piece of land barely 1,000 feet above sea level. 8 miles in one direction, water flows north to the Atlantic. 8 miles in the other, it flows south to the Gulf. And now,
access to everything.
Instead of carrying a canoe, you can move goods between those systems at scale. Not because the terrain was overcome, because it didn't need to be. The continent, at this point, is already set up to move things through it. And once that connection existed, everything else followed. Because once goods can move through a place reliably, predictably, at scale, that place stops being an empty space. It becomes a node. And across Ohio, those nodes turned into cities.
Yeah, and if you ever wonder when you look at a map why certain areas are heavily populated and other areas seem very sparsely populated or have nobody, you can start asking those questions about why is it that way? What didn't they have access to? Why didn't people want to move there? What goods weren't moving through this area?
Each one built around a specific geographic advantage. Not because someone planned it that way, because the conditions were already there. Cincinnati formed where the Ohio River bends and slows on its northernmost arc. The current eases just enough to make loading and unloading easier, to turn a moving river into a workable port. Goods moving between the northeast and the south naturally stopped there. And once they stopped, the city grew around that pause. By 1850, Cincinnati was the 6th largest city in the United States.
Yeah, people forget that. And when the American Civil War breaks out, it's right on the front lines, right? Because across the river from Cincinnati, you have a slave state. You have a state that is officially neutral at the beginning of the war and is providing troops to the Confederate States of America. And so defending Cincinnati, 20th Ohio, that was their first job, was Camp King, just south of Cincinnati, to defend that all-important city.
And the largest city in the American interior.
Yep.
It processed more hogs than any city in the world, so many that it earned the nickname Porkopolis. This is what happens when movement slows down. Cleveland's advantage was different. In 1844, iron ore deposits were discovered around Lake Superior. That ore needed to move south. At the same time, coking coal from the Appalachian Plateau needed to move north. Cleveland sat at the point where those two flows met. A blast furnace needs both, ore and coal, in mass.
And it also helps that not too far east of Cleveland, oil is discovered in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and the guy who ends up making a whole lot of money from that oil being discovered is John D. Rockefeller, who's from Cleveland.
Quantities. Most places had one or the other. Cleveland had both, delivered directly by water. The city didn't just grow, it industrialized at a scale that made it one of the most important manufacturing centers in the world. This is what happens when resources converge. Akron sits directly on the portage path, the same narrow gap that had been connecting watersheds for thousands of years. By the time the rubber industry began to scale in the late 19th century, Akron already had canal access, industrial infrastructure, and a workforce shaped by decades of movement through that corridor. B.F. Goodrich, Firestone, Goodyear. Major tire companies clustered there within a few years of each other.
Yeah, Harvey Firestone's from Columbiana County, the one I was talking about before, but he goes to Akron because that's where that industry is centralizing.
That clustering gets explained as coincidence or relationships between founders. But those people were there because the route was there first.
Yep.
This is what happens when movement compresses into a single point.
And I will just point out here, as much as I'm all about Ohio, right, that you can tell similar stories about a lot of places. But this is a great example. By using Ohio, we can look at how Ohio grew and why certain industries grew, and you can apply that same formula to any other place in the world.
Toledo, at the western end of Lake Erie, developed under a different set of conditions. The surrounding terrain, flat, glaciated, stable, turned out to be ideal for glass manufacturing. The process requires extremely level surfaces and precise temperature control. Combined with water access through the Maumee River and connections to the agricultural interior, Toledo became the center of the American glass industry. By the early 20th century, innovations developed there helped industrialize glass production worldwide. This is what happens when conditions stabilize. Dayton's story looks different, but follows the same logic. The Wright brothers didn't develop controlled, powered flight near Dayton by accident. The region had open, flat terrain, and just as importantly, a long-standing machine culture built on...
All right, now I hate to even do this, but I do have to point out that they did go to Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, to do their flights because the wind conditions and the surface, and it was the right conditions they couldn't get in Ohio. So no, the first flight does not happen in Ohio, but the Wright brothers were Ohioans.
Precision manufacturing. That combination made it possible not just to attempt flight, but to refine it, to iterate, to improve. Kitty Hawk proved it could be done. Dayton is where it actually worked. This is what happens when capability accumulates. Different cities, different industries, different outcomes.
And if you're ever wondering why the National Museum of the United States Air Force is in Dayton, Ohio, at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, well, that's why.
But the same underlying pattern. Geography created the conditions, movement connected them, and everything else built on top of that. The canal system didn't last. Railroads replaced it. And the industrial economy that followed, steel, rubber, glass, automobiles, defined Ohio for the next century.
Yep.
Then it collapsed. Between 1970 and 2000, factories closed across the state. Steel production...
Let me give you a local example for me personally. In 1970... Actually, well, let's go back a little further. In 1930, Youngstown, Ohio, which is where I live, was larger than Nashville, Tennessee. What happened? Because now Youngstown has a third as many people as it did in 1970. I think in 1970 there were 170,000 people. Now it's like 60,000. Well, what happened? That's what happened. We were one of the steel centers of the world. We also had a General Motors assembly plant that employed thousands. When I was growing up in school, if I had friends who, from the outside looking in, looked like they were rich, they weren't rich. I know that now, but they seemed wealthier than the rest of us. It was usually because their parents worked at General Motors at the assembly plant.
Moved elsewhere. Rubber manufacturing declined or shifted overseas. Cities like Youngstown and Cleveland lost a massive share of their industrial base in a single generation.
And for my entire lifetime, up probably into my 30s, all we heard every time there was an election, whether it was a presidential election or a local election, is who's going to bring the industry back? Because that was what defined this area. Now we call it the Rust Belt. And I know it's not just Youngstown, it's the entire region. People were desperate to get that back, and they couldn't see it wasn't coming back because the world had changed.
For a while, it looked like the system had broken, but it hadn't. It had just changed form.
Yeah.
Because the geography that made Ohio an industrial center didn't disappear when the factories did. And that geography is still doing the same thing it always has, moving things. Today, more than 1 billion tons of freight move through Ohio every year.
Yeah, and just 15 miles from me is where East Palestine is, which you probably saw in the news because of the derailment.
By total volume, it ranks among the top states in the country, despite being smaller than places like Texas or California. That movement isn't random. It follows the same logic as everything that came before it.
Yeah.
Ohio sits within a day's drive of a huge share of the American population. Draw a 500-mile radius around Columbus and you capture more than half the country. The terrain is still flat. The routes are still accessible. The same corridors that once carried canal boats and rail lines now carry trucks and cargo planes. Near Dayton, the intersection of I-70 and I-75 has become one of the busiest freight interchanges in the United States. In Columbus, Rickenbacker Airport has developed into a major cargo hub.
And that's one of two. I mean, you also have John Glenn Airport in Columbus, and yeah, it's named after Rickenbacker. Is named after Eddie Rickenbacker, who was, I would argue, the most decorated American of World War I. Something like 7 Distinguished Service Crosses and a Medal of Honor. America's #1 flying ace in the war.
Supported by massive distribution centers built on the same flat, glaciated land that shaped the region thousands of years ago. Along Lake Erie, ports like Cleveland continue to move millions of tons of material each year, linking inland supply chains to global markets. The industries have changed. The system hasn't. Ohio is still doing what it has always done. It's still the place where movement becomes easier. The same geography that moved goods through Ohio also concentrated people within it. Not one kind of people living one kind of life, but many, shaped by completely different economic realities, compressed into the same place.
And I don't know how much he's going to get into it. I'm just going to look ahead because I want to see what else they're going to talk about. It looks like mostly industry. So just talking about history-wise, Ohio is one of the main centers of the Underground Railroad in the years leading up to the American Civil War. And why? Well, again, it's geography. It's Ohio's proximity to slave states. Our entire southern border was Virginia and Kentucky. And so right across the river from Ohio was slavery. And just north of Ohio, across Lake Erie, is Canada. And that's where a lot of those folks are trying to get. And so Underground Railroad was huge here, and a lot of those African Americans ended up settling here. You had German immigration was heavy in Ohio. A lot of Pennsylvania Germans settled northeast Ohio, for example. A lot of Italians and a lot of people from Eastern Europe came here. And so we've got this incredible mix. Now Ohio, next to Minnesota, Ohio has the largest Somali population of anywhere in the United States because we have a lot of Somali refugees that are coming. So we see a lot of that happening still.
The flat Western Plains produced farmers. The Eastern Appalachian Plateau produced miners and steel workers. The river cities, Cincinnati, Marietta, Portsmouth, Gallipolis, produced merchants, manufacturers, and traders, tied into the movement of goods along the Ohio River system. Along Lake Erie, ports like Cleveland and Toledo brought waves of immigrants from Germany, Ireland, Poland, Hungary, Czechia, Slovakia, drawn into the industries that the geography had already made possible.
Yeah.
A single state containing multiple versions of the American economy at once. And when those systems exist side by side, they don't just produce different industries. They produce different incentives, different priorities, different ideas about how the country should work. Questions about labor and capital, tariffs and trade, who owns the land and who works it. Ohio didn't just have those arguments, it had all of them at the same time, which made it something unusual, not exceptional, representative. A politician who could build a coalition in Ohio could build one almost anywhere.
Yeah, and different states become that bellwether over time. And Ohio has never been the exclusive one, but we've been one of, what they call the swing states. Not so much anymore. We've been pretty red the last few elections, but for most of my life, we've been a solid swing state. Where if you could appeal to Ohio, there was a pretty good chance you were appealing to the whole country. We were pretty representative of that. I think other places are taking that spot now, but doesn't mean it won't happen again.
And for more than a century, that's exactly what happened. From 1896 to 2012, Ohio voted for the winning presidential candidate in 28 out of 30 elections. Over that same period, it produced more presidents than any state except Virginia. Not because it consistently produced exceptional policy.
All right, so I think he misspoke there a little bit, because he talked about 1896 to 2012 and then said over that same period. Most of Ohio's presidents came before that period, and all but one of Virginia's presidents came before that period. Ohio's presidents, Ohio and Virginia both claim one, and that's William Henry Harrison, who was born in Virginia but elected from Ohio. But if we're going by birthplace, then Virginia has 8, Ohio has 7. Ohio's first president was Ulysses S. Grant, elected in 1868, and then our last president was Warren Harding, who was elected in 1920. So you're talking about a period of 52 years in which 7 people born in Ohio were elected president.
Because it contained a version of the country in miniature. Campaigns didn't come to Ohio out of habit. They came because winning Ohio meant assembling
Mahoning County! Hey, that must be the Canfield Fair right there.
Coalition that could win nationally. Urban and rural, industrial and agricultural, immigrant and native-born. Presidents kept coming out of that system. Grant, Hayes, Garfield, McKinley, Taft, Harding, one after another, across the entire...
We're just going to completely skip over Benjamin Harrison? What the heck?
...industrial age. The same geographic diversity that shaped its economy made it politically decisive. But that pattern is starting to break. And the reason it's breaking follows the same logic as everything else.
Going back to that, I'm guessing he probably viewed Benjamin Harrison as being from Indiana, since that's where he was elected from, was Indiana.
For most of its modern history, Ohio worked because it contained the whole system. Different industries, regions, and interests held together in a single, connected geography. That balance is what made it representative, and that balance depended on something specific. It depended on those different economic realities existing side by side, at scale. That's what's starting to change. Not all at once, and not everywhere equally, but in ways that follow the same geographic lines that have always defined the state. In the eastern part of Ohio, the old industrial corridor along the Pennsylvania border, steel production collapsed. Cities like Youngstown and Warren lost a massive share of their
Warren. I was born in Warren.
Manufacturing base in a single generation.
Yep.
The economic identity of those places had been built around industry.
Yeah, and listen, talking about politics, I've said this before. Where I live for almost my entire life, you did not get elected here without a D next to your name, period. It didn't matter if you were running for dog catcher. You were a Democrat if you wanted to get elected. Every local office, every statewide office, every national office, the people here voted for Democrats, period. I grew up in a world in which everybody I knew said, well, we're middle class, and middle class people vote for Democrats. And it's a heavily union area because of the steel mills, because of the GM plant. And unions supported Democrats. The last 10 to 15 years, that has completely been turned on its head. And I live in a very, very, very red part of the world now. It's remarkable how quickly that changed here. And a lot of it has to do with the changing demographics, the changing appeal of the parties, depending on the people that support who and why and all that stuff. It's fascinating to watch.
The industry disappeared. The system that supported it didn't get replaced with something equivalent. What remained was smaller, less connected, and more isolated from the rest of the state's growth. At the same time, central Ohio was moving in a different direction. Around Columbus, the economy shifted toward services, logistics, healthcare, finance. Industries.
And Columbus has skyrocketed in population. It's now not only our capital city, but also our largest city.
Tied less to physical production and more to networks of information and capital. Growth concentrated there. Jobs concentrated there. And the population followed. The same state that once contained multiple economic systems in balance started to separate into regions that no longer experienced the same reality. And when those realities diverge, the politics follows. The Mahoning Valley, Youngstown, Warren, Niles, shifted dramatically and now
3 of my 4 grandparents are from Niles. I grew up in Mineral Ridge, which is just south of Niles. I mean, literally 3 miles from downtown Niles, which is where William McKinley was born, is where I grew up. I grew up going to the Niles McKinley Library. I mean, this is home for me right here.
national elections, moving away from the political alignment that had defined it for decades. Meanwhile, the suburbs
This whole area now, I said earlier, you couldn't get elected without a D next to your name. Now in this area, you don't get elected without an R next to your name. That's just the way it is. It's crazy.
Columbus trended in the opposite direction, shaped by a different economy and a different set of incentives. 2 Ohios moving apart. The same 2 Ohios the glacier defined thousands of years ago, now diverging in a new way. The result is that Ohio no longer behaves the way it once did. It no longer consistently reflects the national outcome.
And like I said, take all of this. I know most of the people watching this, you're not from Ohio, you don't care about Ohio. Take all of this and apply this to anywhere. You can use the same analytical tools to understand why where you live is the way that it is and how it has changed over time.
The bellwether cracked. And it cracked along geographic lines.
Yeah.
Not because Ohio changed randomly, because the system that made it representative is no longer as tightly connected as it used to be. And yet, the same geography that pulled the system apart is now pulling parts of it back together. Not by reversing what happened, but by making this place useful again under a different set of conditions.
Hey, I like that. Make Ohio useful again.
2022, Intel announced plans to build a massive semiconductor fabrication complex outside Columbus.
So what we do have going for us is that a lot of that infrastructure in terms of the interstate highway system, for example, is still there. A lot of that accessibility to places like Chicago and New York and to shipping and all of those sorts of things is still there and still useful. So it's just about repurposing the industries that take advantage of those systems.
One of the largest industrial investments in American history. Around the same time, Honda and LG Energy Solution announced a multi-billion-dollar battery manufacturing plant in central Ohio, part of a growing cluster tied to electric vehicles and advanced manufacturing. Every state in the country offered incentives, but the geography closed the deal. Semiconductor manufacturing requires enormous quantities of clean, continuous water.
We have that.
It requires flat land for facilities that stretch across hundreds of acres. It requires reliable power, access to supply chains, and proximity to a large workforce. And it requires something else. It needs to be close to where the products will be used. Ohio sits within a day's drive of a huge share of the American population. The same central position that once made it a freight hub now make it a distribution point for high-value, time-sensitive goods. The same glaciated terrain that supported agriculture and logistics now supports massive industrial campuses.
And this is why it's important that people not be stuck, like I said, growing up where I do, for years it was all about how do we bring the steel mills back? How do we bring the car manufacturing back? Instead of saying, that stuff's not coming back, but how do we replace that with something that makes sense in the 21st century? And it's great to see that that's happening.
The same water systems that once carried raw materials now supply the most advanced manufacturing processes in the world. The industries are different, the requirements are different, but the logic is the same.
Yeah.
The continent is still routing its most important systems through the same place, not because of history, because of geography, and that hasn't changed. The slogan on Ohio's welcome sign reads, "The heart of it all." It sounds like something a tourism board would come up with, a line meant to be friendly, forgettable, easy to ignore. But it's more accurate than it looks. Not because Ohio sits in the middle of the map, and not because it tried to become important, but because the structure of the continent made it unavoidable. The rivers that drain this part of North America split and nearly reconnect here. The glaciers flattened one half of the land and left the other intact. The terrain made movement easier in some directions than others, and forced it through specific points. Over time, trade followed those routes, then industry, then people, and eventually the systems that shaped the entire country. Ohio didn't move to the center of those systems. Those systems formed around the geography Ohio happens to occupy. That's why the state can feel so ordinary, because it isn't defined by a single extreme. It's defined by how many different systems pass through it at once. The middle of nowhere is a place people avoid. The center of everything is a place people pass through, and some choose to stay. Ohio has always been the second kind.
All right, of course, I love that. I definitely subscribed to his channel, and I would encourage you to do the same. I think that was really well done, very complex, very comprehensive. So Geography Effect, great job. You got a new subscriber in me. Links in the description if you want to go check out his other content. I want to give a thank you to Drake Westfield and Larry Oliveira. Thank you so much for your support on Patreon. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.